The automatic doors slid open with a faint hiss. A man stepped inside, his figure unremarkable. Middle-aged, wrapped in a weathered jacket, his cap pulled low to shield his face, hands buried deep in his pockets. He looked like any other customer wandering in for a carton of milk or a loaf of bread. No one noticed him. No one knew his name. But this man was Daniel Grayson, the founder and CEO of the entire Grayson's market chain. He paused, standing quietly just past the entrance, his gaze slowly sweeping the sales floor. What he saw gnawed at him. Shelves were misaligned and partially bare. Customers moved sluggishly, avoiding eye contact, like shadows cast by a dim light. There were no greetings, no friendly chatter, not even the faintest trace of a smile. The air was thick, not with the usual bustle of retail, but with something colder, emptier. It was a silence that felt unnatural, like the breathless stillness before a storm. At one checkout lane, a female employee in her early 30s stood scanning items. Her hair was loosely tied back, strands falling out around her pale face. Her eyes were swollen and rimmed with red. She tried to offer a polite smile to the customers in line, but her hands trembled, and her voice cracked with every word she spoke. Daniel ducked behind a nearby shelf, pretending to browse the canned goods, but his eyes remained fixed on her. He hadn't imagined it. He saw her swipe away a tear with the edge of her sleeve. She was crying. Not in the break room, not after work, but right there, in the middle of her shift, in front of customers. And then he saw it. The manager, a man he didn't recognize, stormed out of the back, his voice sharp, his posture aggressive. Something was wrong. Deeply wrong. Daniel Grayson stood motionless in the aisle, hidden in plain sight like a phantom among the ruins of what he had once built with pride. The red and white logo still hung on the far wall, his design, his name. Grayson's Market, a name that had once represented fairness, dignity, and unity. For years he had preached one philosophy: treat your employees well, and they will treat your customers even better. It was simple, and it had worked. His company had grown to 18 thriving branches, held together by trust, respect, and shared values. But something had shifted. In recent months, customer complaints surged. Store quality plummeted. Employees grew short-tempered. Some didn't show up at all. And then came the letter, anonymous, scathing, and full of fear. A whistleblower inside his own company, warning of mistreatment, of toxicity taking root beneath the surface. When Daniel confronted his regional managers, they dismissed it with a shrug. Just a few lazy employees, they said. People who don't like hard work. But Daniel knew better. When you lead long enough, you learn to recognize silence, not just as a lack of sound, but as a symptom of something deeper. When people stop speaking up, stop caring, it's never because of laziness. It's because they've lost hope. He wandered down the aisles slowly, taking in every detail. He didn't need to fake his inspection. This store made everyone invisible. Customers moved like ghosts, unspoken stories clinging to their faces. Employees were hollow-eyed and distant. No laughter, no light-hearted banter, no spark. The dairy section was disheveled. The bread rack held only a few crumpled, half-owned packages. A promotional sign had fallen and leaned awkwardly against a trash bin. No one had bothered to fix it. In the produce section, an onion lay on the floor, its skin dry and cracking. Daniel stooped to pick it up, but found no one to hand it to. There was no supervision, no leadership, no pride. Once, at every Grayson's Market, morning shifts began with a team huddle. Smiles were shared, floors sparkled. Managers did rounds with clipboards, checking scents, lighting, and layout. But here, the floors were sticky, the air reeked of stale coffee, and the employees' eyes were drained of any light. Daniel clenched his fists inside his pockets, anger bubbling up beneath the surface, but not at his employees. What he saw wasn't laziness, it was surrender. These weren't people who didn't care, they were people who had been broken. Suddenly a harsh voice cut through the store like a whip crack. "Kendra!" Daniel turned sharply. A tall, broad-shouldered man emerged from the back, his black vest stitched with the word supervisor. His face was red with fury as he stomped toward the checkout counter and slammed a clipboard down. "Crying on shift again?" he barked, voice low but threatening. "How many times do I have to tell you? If you can't keep it together, then quit." Kendra flinched as if she'd been struck. She swallowed hard and wiped her cheeks with the back of her trembling hand. "I'm sorry, they'll be fine," she whispered. "Fine?" Troy, as his name tag read, sneered, leaning in close. "You've already taken 2 days off this month. Don't be surprised if your shift next week vanishes." She nodded numbly, staring at the floor. No one stepped in. No one said a word. Fear hung over them all like a curtain. Daniel stood frozen behind a shelf, his chest tight, his breath shallow. This wasn't firm leadership. This was psychological assault. And it was happening right under his name. After Troy disappeared back into the office, the silence returned, thicker than before. Kendra took a long breath, squared her shoulders, and turned back to her work. Her voice, now robotic, repeated, "Thank you," to each customer, even though her lips trembled and her hands still shook. Daniel couldn't look away. He shifted a few cans on the shelf in a show of distraction, but his eyes never left checkout lane 4. Kendra didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply endured. She gripped the edge of the counter as if anchoring herself to it, lips pressed into a line, fighting back the next wave of tears. A pain bloomed in Daniel's chest. This wasn't anger anymore. It was sorrow. What kind of pain does a person carry that makes them break in public, yet still show up to work, still smile, still serve? What kind of system had he unknowingly let flourish, where silence had replaced humanity? He wandered into the snacks aisle, but he saw it all. The glances, the stiff shoulders, the wordless tension. A young male employee stubbed his toe on an abandoned pallet. He winced, quietly swearing under his breath. No one asked if he was okay. No one even looked his way. They had all learned the same lesson. Stay quiet or risk being next. This wasn't a failing store. It was a silent cry for help, and Daniel had finally heard it. The store moved like a tired heart, each beat slow, strained. A young man restocked shelves with his head down, shoulders hunched like he was trying to shrink away from the world. An elderly customer stood silently at the service counter, waiting. 1 minute, then 2, then 3. No one came. At the frozen goods section, a female employee stretched to reach a top shelf to attach a price tag. Her arms trembled slightly. Her breath came shallow and quick. She wasn't just tired. Her body seemed to sag beneath the weight of something unseen, something deeply personal. Daniel saw it. He saw all of it. These weren't just employees. They were people on the verge of burning out. They moved like sleepwalkers. Their eyes were heavy with something more than fatigue, something deeper, almost existential. The way they sighed without knowing it, the way they barely made eye contact, the way they spoke only when necessary. All of it told him the same truth. They weren't just exhausted. They had stopped believing their work mattered. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He thought he had come to investigate an underperforming store. But now, standing in the midst of these weary souls, he realized the rot ran far deeper. He drifted to the housewares aisle, absently picking up a flimsy aluminum pan. But his mind wasn't in the aisle. It was in a meeting room from weeks ago. On a table filled with graphs, sales sheets, and performance reviews sat a single brown envelope, no return address. Inside was a letter, hastily written, but impossible to ignore. "Someone at store 7 is being pushed to the edge. You need to look into this before it's too late." At the time, his regional directors had laughed. "Probably some Gen Z kid upset they didn't get a raise," one had joked. Another rolled his eyes. "If we stopped for every whiny complaint, we'd never get anything done." Daniel had stayed silent, but the voice in that letter, it hadn't been whining. It was fear. It was desperation. It was someone clinging to the last thread of belief that someone, somewhere, still cared. Now, after what he had seen, after watching Kendra's hands shake as she bagged groceries, after watching an entire team move like ghosts, he knew. The letter had been real, and he was the only one with enough power left to make it right. During break, Daniel bought a granola bar from a vending machine and slowly made his way toward the break room. He didn't plan to enter, just observe. He wanted to see how the team unwound after a long, draining shift. But as he neared the door, he stopped cold. Inside, muffled sobs, then a voice, fragile and torn between exhaustion and heartbreak. "I can't do this anymore," it whispered. "I tried. I really tried, but nothing's ever enough." It was Kendra. "They cut my hours again. I can't even afford gas. My rent's late." Silence. Then another voice, softer, likely the young man from the frozen section. "Troy's coming after me too. Anyone with kids or who calls out sick gets punished." Kendra broke down. "My son, he had an asthma attack. I wasn't skipping work to slack off. He was in the hospital. I begged Troy to let me switch shifts. He said I was unreliable." Daniel felt like he'd been punched in the gut. Each word was a blade, cutting away at the illusion he had carried for too long, that the system was working, that his company was still what he had built, but it wasn't. Somewhere along the way, it had become something else, something cold, something cruel. By the time Kendra left the store that evening, the sky had turned a deep shade of violet. The Grayson's Market sign glowed above her, its red letters casting long streaks across the cracked pavement. Daniel followed at a respectful distance, blending into the shadows. Kendra walked slowly, her body weighed down as though the day had drained her soul. She stopped beside a battered sedan, paint peeling, rear window patched with clear tape. She opened her worn wallet, flipping through its contents. A folded utility bill, an ID photo, a nail clipper. She turned the wallet upside down. A few coins dropped into her palm. She stared at them. Then, quietly, almost instinctively, she covered her face with both hands and sobbed. Right there in the empty lot, under the flickering parking lot light, she broke, not from weakness, but from a strength that had been stretched too thin for too long. Daniel didn't move. He stood by a tree, his figure still as stone, his heart heavier than it had ever felt. He had read reports, approved schedules, signed off on cost-cutting initiatives, but he had never seen an employee cry because she couldn't afford the gas to get home. That night, Daniel didn't feel cold, though the wind sliced through his coat. What he felt was grief, the kind that settles into your bones and refuses to let go. Kendra sat slumped by her car, her body trembling, her sobs echoing in the empty space. A mother, a worker, a person abandoned by the very institution that bore his name. That night, Daniel made a decision. He hadn't come this far to collect evidence. He had seen enough, heard enough, felt enough. The next morning, long before sunrise, Daniel returned. He wore a fresh uniform, a temporary name tag. Dan, probationary staff. No one looked up. No one welcomed him. That said everything. He was assigned to the dry food section. His partner was a skinny young man with thick glasses and messy brown hair. "Welcome, newbie," the kid mumbled without looking up. "I'm Marcus. Don't expect much talking around here. It's safer that way." Daniel offered a faint smile. This one was observant. While sorting cereal boxes, Daniel asked gently, "How long have you worked here?" 2 years, Marcus said. but I've never felt the air this heavy before. Something's changed." Then, lowering his voice, he continued, "Troy's been cutting shifts, changing schedules without notice. If you have kids or health problems, you're out. But if you stay quiet, he gives you bonus hours." Daniel's jaw tightened. Shift scheduling wasn't meant to be a weapon, yet here it was. "What about Kendra?" Daniel asked, his voice low as he straightened a box of pasta. Marcus hesitated, then sighed. "She's one of the hardest workers we've got. But her kid got sick. Real sick. She gave notice, asked to trade shifts. No one agreed. She missed them anyway. Since then, Troy's practically erased her from the schedule." Marcus held a box of baking powder a little too tightly. "She's down to about 15 hours a week. That's not even enough for rent, let alone her son's meds." 15 hours. That number had crossed Daniel's desk. He had signed off on it, thinking it was just staffing optimization for Store 7. But now, he saw the truth. That wasn't efficiency. That was the slow suffocation of a struggling family. And he had approved it. By the end of his shift, Daniel made his way to the side office. The small room housed the store's internal computer system, an access terminal used mostly by senior staff. During the shift change, as the night crew took over, he saw his chance. With a few swift keystrokes, he logged in under a technical support account, a quiet back door he'd created years ago and had never needed until now. He wasn't here to spy anymore. He was here to rescue the soul of his company. The login screen flickered to life under Daniel's fingers. A few keystrokes later, he was staring at the soul of the store. Its shift schedules, internal memos, and staffing patterns. He typed in one name, Kendra Owens. The chart unfolded like a slow tragedy. 3 months ago, 32 hours a week. Then 24. Then 15. This week, just 9. Below the schedule, an internal note blinked coldly on the screen. Unreliable, not priority for scheduling. Daniel's jaw tightened. He typed in more names. Marcus, Linda, Jorge. All employees who carried the look of quiet defeat. The data didn't lie. Their hours had been gradually slashed, and under each name that same sterile note. Unreliable. Then he searched the ones always near Troy. The favorites. Their hours, steady, even bumped up slightly. Bonuses logged, praise in the notes. This wasn't managerial oversight. This was calculated cruelty. That afternoon, Daniel walked to the manager's office. He knocked gently, 3 times. From behind the door, he could hear faint country music and the sound of paper tearing. "Come in," a voice grunted. Troy looked up, tired eyes laced with arrogance. He didn't recognize Daniel, just another low-level staffer. "What's the issue?" he asked, barely looking up from his clipboard. Daniel stepped inside, voice calm and level. "I heard some talk about Kendra, that her shifts were cut. Is that true?" Troy leaned back in his chair, his laugh dry. "Kendra? She's a walking mess. Always got some story about her kid. This job isn't daycare. I don't babysit." Daniel remained still, but a storm brewed behind his eyes. "She said she requested time off when her son was hospitalized. Gave notice." "This is a job, not a charity," Troy said, cutting him off. "I need people I can count on, not someone who runs home every time their kid sneezes." The callousness in his voice was suffocating. Then Troy added, almost proudly, "Cutting hours, that's what corporate likes. Less payroll, more margins. They love my numbers." Daniel stood still, staring. In front of him was a man using leadership as a weapon, slicing away people's dignity to polish performance reports. He stepped out of the office, fists clenched, his chest pounding. not from exertion, but from rage. The Grayson's Market logo caught his eye, hanging above the main aisle. His name, now linked with exploitation. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Janet, cancel all my meetings tomorrow." "But, sir, the quarterly—" "I know," Daniel interrupted, his voice firmer than ever, "but something more important needs my attention. I need to be at store number 7, not as CEO, as a man who needs to make things right." That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He sat in a modest motel room near the store, a cup of untouched tea cooling beside him. On the wooden table, he'd spread out notes, names, schedules, observations. At the center, one name circled in red: Kendra Owens. He closed his eyes, remembering his younger days, scrubbing floors, wrapping produce, clocking out with aching feet. Back then, he'd sworn never to become the kind of boss who forgot the people who made it all possible. Yet now, here he was. He unlocked his phone and stared at a photo of Troy, proud, polished, praised. He swiped it away and paused on an old team picture. Authentic smiles, real pride. "Enough," he whispered. "Tomorrow, I stop hiding." The first rays of morning light barely touched the glass doors of Grayson's Market when Daniel returned. No cap, no disguise. He wore a pressed gray suit, a light blue tie, and a polished metal badge clipped to his chest. Daniel Grayson, Chief Executive Officer. His steps were deliberate, silent, but somehow the air shifted. A few employees looked up, faces froze, eyes widened. "That's him," someone whispered. "That's the owner." Across the floor, Kendra paused mid-scan, her hand frozen in the air. Her eyes met his. This wasn't the quiet man who had stocked soup cans beside her. This was something else entirely. Daniel walked directly to the service counter where Troy stood, coffee in hand, muttering to himself over the schedule. Troy didn't notice the hush falling over the store. He didn't feel the eyes following Daniel's every step, not until polished leather shoes stopped right in front of him. "Good morning," Daniel said, voice smooth and clear, but with the weight of thunder behind it. Troy looked up, confused. "Who?" Daniel reached into his coat, pulled out the badge, and held it up. "Daniel Grayson, Chief Executive Officer." The color drained from Troy's face. His hand trembled. "Wait, you're—" "I'm the one who saw it all, heard it all, and now," Daniel's tone sharpened, "I need a word with the manager of this store." Troy stammered, "Sir, there must be a misunderstanding." "Cutting the hours of a single mother whose child was hospitalized," Daniel said coldly. "Is that your idea of operational efficiency?" Silence. Employees stopped moving. Marcus turned. Kendra held her breath. "You knew exactly who was vulnerable," Daniel continued, "and instead of lifting them up, you punished them." Troy laughed nervously. "It's just business. I was trimming excess costs. It's what corporate wants." "Enough," Daniel snapped. He took a breath. "I didn't come here to argue." He raised his hand. "I came to take back the keys." Troy's face collapsed. "No one's going to save you," Daniel added. Troy reached into his pocket, pulled out the key ring, and handed it over. "You're making a mistake," he said bitterly. "They don't want to work. They want to be coddled." Daniel stared him down. "They've been working harder than you ever will, just under a burden you've never carried." Troy left, his pride shattered and his authority stripped. Daniel turned to face the store. He spoke, not as a CEO, but as a man who had finally remembered what leadership meant. 10 minutes, break room, all staff." No one hesitated. The break room filled. People stood, sat, leaned against walls, dust still clinging to their uniforms. The air was thick with confusion, fear, and hope. Daniel stood without a podium, without a suit of armor. Just truth. "I'm the founder of Grayson's Market," he began, "and I've failed in the one thing that matters most: protecting you." She silenced. Eyes shimmered. Kendra stood in the corner, arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I've seen it. I believe you. And starting today, how we run this store will change." He turned to Kendra. "If you're willing, I'd like you to become the assistant manager of this store." Time paused. Kendra blinked. "Me?" she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Full authority. Full trust. I've been written up. They said I was unreliable. I cried in front of customers," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "And you still showed up, still worked, still held your head high. You've already done the job. This just makes it official." Kendra bit her lip, her hands trembling. But her voice, when it came, was clear. "If you believe in me." "I'll try," Kendra whispered. Daniel's voice, warm and unwavering, gently met hers. "Don't try, Kendra. You've already done it. Now, just keep going." The soft click of the manager's office door behind her echoed like the turning of a chapter. Kendra stood still, not out of fear, but because she was gathering herself for something new. Something she'd never imagined she would be tasked to rebuild. The air still carried remnants of Troy's tenure, stale coffee, harsh cologne, and a colder scent that couldn't be bottled. Oppression. She moved to the desk slowly, then sat in the creaky swivel chair. It groaned beneath her, but this time she didn't flinch. She stared at the old computer, then began to type. One name after another appeared. Linda, 5 consecutive night shifts. Jorge, a split shift with just 7 hours of sleep in between. Cassie, no assigned hours, flagged for too many leave requests because of childcare. Kendra leaned in closer. Her expression hardened. It wasn't just her. The abuse had been system-wide. Troy had turned scheduling into sabotage. He hadn't just robbed people of hours. He robbed them of stability, of dignity, of the right to be more than just cogs in a machine. She opened a fresh page, cleared the old schedule, and with trembling fingers that grew steadier with every line, she began to rewrite it. Not just the hours, but the very culture. Prioritize single parents, assign consistent morning shifts, limit back-to-back nights to 3 max, accommodate school, family, and health needs when notified, adjust with compassion. Each click of the keyboard echoed like a nail being driven into a new foundation. She wasn't building a schedule, she was building trust. Because if a company couldn't acknowledge the reality of people's lives, it didn't deserve their loyalty. At the bottom of the new chart, she added one final line in bold. "Concerns about shifts? See me directly. My door is always open." When she looked up, sunlight spilled through the dusty blinds. Outside the office window, employees moved across the floor, not with dread, but with purpose. For the first time, there was a flicker of something she hadn't seen in weeks. Hope. That afternoon, she sent an internal message. 5 minutes before shift change, meet in the break room. No one knew what to expect, but everyone came. There were no slamming clipboards, no cutting stairs, just Kendra, standing at the front. Her hands still chalky from the floor, her voice unsure but brave. "I know these past weeks have been hell," she began. "I used to think the only way to survive was to stay silent." She paused, swallowed. "But I was wrong, and I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner, and for not standing with you." The room shifted. Marcus looked down. Linda clenched her hands. "Starting today, you have the right to speak. Your schedules will match your realities. No one should have to choose between feeding their child and keeping a job, and if I ever get it wrong, come to me, or, if needed, go straight to Mr. Grayson." There was no applause, just one slow, heartfelt clap, then another, till the room echoed, not with noise but with something louder, relief. The meeting ended. People left the room lighter than they entered. Not healed, but beginning. Kendra stayed behind, her eyes searching. She spotted Marcus in the back, pushing a supply crate. "Marcus?" she called gently. He turned. "Something wrong? You helped Linda with the new hire earlier?" "Sort of, but I'm not really great with people," he mumbled. Kendra smiled softly. "Troy once said I wasn't worth trusting, and he said you weren't fit to face customers." Marcus froze. "But I've seen how you talk to your co-workers. Calm, kind, sincere. That's exactly who I need out front." His eyes widened. "You mean?" "I want you greeting customers. If you're up for it, I'll train you myself, starting tomorrow." He didn't respond right away. Then slowly, he nodded. The nod of someone who'd been overlooked for too long, finally being seen. Days passed. Grayson's market didn't become a miracle overnight, but it grew warmer. Marcus helped a confused elderly woman in frozen foods. She smiled, surprised. "It's been so long since anyone asked if I needed help." Linda hummed as she stalked fruit, her movements less rushed, more deliberate. A younger staffer helped a customer carry bags to her car without being asked. Someone quietly picked up a fallen sign and placed it upright again. And at checkout lane 4, where Kendra had once wept silently, she now knelt to hand a sticker to a little girl with tangled curls and a pout. The child giggled. Her mother smiled gratefully. Daniel stood quietly near the back of the store. No badge, no announcement. Just a man watching from the sidelines as something he'd nearly lost bloomed back to life. A week later he returned again, this time in a pale blue shirt, coat slung over his shoulder. The aisles no longer whispered defeat. The store had found its rhythm. He stopped near the registers. Kendra spotted him and blinked. "I didn't think you'd come by today," she said, a little shy. Daniel smiled, eyes soft. "I didn't think I'd get to see this so soon." "I'm trying to do the right thing," she said, voice quiet. "Some days, I panic. I almost gave up." He stepped closer. "What matters is, you didn't." He lowered his voice. "I didn't give you this chance, Kendra. You claimed it, every time you stood up after being pushed down." Her eyes shimmered. "I used to think I was just replaceable." Daniel shook his head. "You're the reason I believe this place is worth continuing." There was no music, no announcement, just shared understanding in the middle of a busy store. That night, Kendra returned to the office. She didn't turn on the computer. She took a blank page and taped it above the monitor. In thick strokes, she wrote, "Schedules exist to support, not to punish." Beneath it, she added, "One line at a time, listen first, adjust later. Every hour worked is a piece of someone's life. Never let anyone cry in fear of losing their job. Good people don't need control, just trust." She looked at her reflection in the locker mirror. Same tired eyes, but now they held strength. She smiled, not for a title, not for praise, but because she knew no one on her team would feel alone again. That night, the doors of Grayson's market closed with a soft hum. The lights dimmed. Kendra stood at lane 4, her old battleground. She looked around. Marcus guided a trainee through inventory. Linda waved goodbye, her shirt folded neatly over one arm. Daniel was gone, but she felt him there, like a quiet nod from a mentor who had just passed the torch. Kendra exhaled, turned off the light, and stepped outside. At the gas station, her wallet wasn't empty. Her hands didn't tremble. She filled the tank, got in the car, glanced back at her son, peacefully asleep, and smiled. Not because she'd earned a title, but because she never gave up. A soft, steady voice echoed in the background. Sometimes, changing a system starts with listening to just one person, and sometimes the strongest one is the one who broke down mid-shift, but still showed up the next morning. The screen faded to black. Then, in quiet white text, if you saw yourself in this story, leave a single dot in the comments. We're listening.